You're tuning in to Seek Travel Ride, a podcast which shares the experiences of people taking bike adventures all around the world. And this episode of Seek Travel Ride is brought to you by Red White Apparel. They don't make gloves, jerseys or flashy kits. They just focus on bib shorts, specifically ones which are going to keep you comfortable on long rides. I've recently started using their bib shorts on some of my longest bike adventures, and here is what I've learnt. When your gear fits perfectly, you focus fully on what you're doing, the landscape and the scenery, and you're not distracted by discomfort. If you've got some long days in the saddle planned ahead, whether that's ultra cycling, a long distance tour, or just some long day rides, hit the link in the show notes to find out more. Trust me, your butt will thank you. Thanks to Red White Apparel for supporting this episode.
That first trip ended up in me cracking the frame on the bike I was riding. So a couple of days before my return ferry was due, I pretty much totaled the frame. Was riding it down a sort of grassy slope to a camp spot and just not really paying attention. The sun had gone down, was ready for a dinner. Just lapsed in judgment, dropped the front wheel into a hole and obviously got the tent on the front, a fair bit of weight. Went over the bars and then heard a bit of a creaky sound, didn't think much of it. And then sort of walked the bike to the camp, set up the tent, cooking dinner, reached into a frame bag and then spot the whole top tube, down tube, front triangle was just completely compressed like a beer can, fully crumpled. But it didn't crack all the way through, so I ended up kind of coasting it and walking and riding on the bike a little bit over the last couple of days just to get back to the ferry terminal. There was like 80 odd miles of terrain still to cover.
Welcome to Seek Travel Ride, where we share the stories and experiences of people taking amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello listeners, Bella Malloy here and welcome to another episode of Seek Travel Ride. Today, we're joined by guest Ben Boxer, who, it's fair to say, is both a keen bikepacker and marine conservation advocate. In 2023, he managed to fuel both his passions with a bikepacking trip on the Shetland Isles, where he'd combine coastal riding with a chance to do a healthy spot of whale watching as well. He called this adventure Wheels and Whales, and it was nothing short of energising for Ben. Then, in early 2024, Ben's partner moved from the UK to Vancouver, BC, a place he'd actually been fortunate enough to go to before as well. And while he'd very much have loved to have made the permanent move himself, due to health-related constraints, he knew it just wouldn't be possible. Instead, he planned a summer bikepacking visit to Vancouver, but he also didn't really want to be wishing his life away in the months in between, and knew all too well he'd need a plan to combat the potential post-adventure blues that could also set in once that summer Vancouver trip would eventually come to an end. Ben's environmental consciousness also wrestled with the dilemma which comes with taking long-haul flights. So he wanted to involve himself in something that would serve two purposes. The result was a pretty ambitious project where he would cycle 7,587 kilometres, which is the equivalent distance from London to Vancouver. But he wouldn't be going out on a point-to-point long-distance trip. Instead, he'd look to do it all on local trails and roads. In part, this would be a way for him to not only discover more about the area he was living in, but also to build excitement and appreciation for what was on offer outdoors in his own backyard. Secondly, this journey would also serve as a way to starkly highlight the huge distances involved in taking a 9-hour international flight and also offset the emissions from that. Much like his Wheels and Whales ride, Ben would also use it as an opportunity to fundraise for local conservation projects as well. I'm super stoked to be chatting with Ben today. I can't wait to learn more about how he's combined his passion for bikepacking with that of marine conservation and environmentalism, and also to learn what's it actually like to take such a huge adventure, covering massive distances all while keeping it local. Ben Boxer, a big warm welcome to the show.
Thanks. That was a very flattering intro. Very kind words.
It's funny with the amount of guests that would say something like that, because I guess you don't reflect back often and think about what your journey's been like. Sometimes it takes someone else telling you about it to actually be able to take stock of it, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're bang on with with your research there and kind of highlighting that Shetland trip, that first Shetland trip was a bit of a game changer really, and set me on this little journey of trying to merge those two passions, because prior to that it was two very different parts of my life. Biking and bike adventure was related to whale watching and marine conservation. Those two things seem pretty different, but yeah, that first Shetland trip was a bit of an eye opener into how you can use the bike as a tool for accessing these kind of places. So
Yeah, and then you look at what you've done since that trip, which, as I said, was 2023, not too long ago.
Mhm.
But Ben, I've got so many questions for you, many of them around that first Shetland trip as well. But Ben Boxer, the question I start my show with, and I ask it of all my guests, is, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think I had a bike for a couple of weeks and then traded it in for something a little bit more up my street. It was an old Trek with a coaster brake, but I had a couple of older brothers who are into mountain biking, so I swapped it out for something with a suspension fork and no coaster brake, and they soon started sending me off little backyard jumps and stuff. So it was good fun. It was a specialized hot rock. I think it had red and black flames on it. It was a sick little bike.
Oh, awesome. I love the idea of the nostalgic trip as a kid to be jumping off like little jumps in the backyard. Sometimes you build them. Oh, I never did this, but I do know people who like build jumps and they'd have like one of their mates lying in front of it and you'd have to jump over them.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if you ever did something like that, but
Probably, to be honest. Yeah, we built some sketchy things in our back garden and down the local woods.
It is amazing sometimes sort of reflecting back on the sketchy type of things we did. I had a laugh the other day. There was like some sort of, I don't know if it was a meme, and I'm older than you, but I remember our playgrounds, this is growing up in Australia, you had like a slippery slide which was just plain metal, and in the hot Australian sun would just burn the absolute bejesus out of your legs. Or you had what we called like the spinning wheel of death, which is like a merry-go-round, which was just like a big metal rink. And typically you'd jump on it and people would spin it up and spin it up and spin it up, and then someone would try and jump off and probably break an arm. That's a bit of like, I don't want to come across as old woman shaking fist at cloud as back in our day, but it is a bit different. But back to your childhood, your first bike. Were you someone, I'm not saying you rode bikes throughout then, but were you someone who was very much deeply connected with the outdoors in that sort of active way growing up as a kid? Because the outdoors, environmentalism, we've talked about marine conservationism in your intro as well. There's stuff that you would use as a descriptor for you, as a passion for you. Do you think that came from your childhood?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, both mountain biking and like water sports, and I've always lived by the coast here in the UK. Both those things have always been quite significant parts of my life right from childhood. So yeah, a lot of my earliest memories are on bikes, messing around in the woods, and then going, sailing and windsurfing with my family. So right from the beginning, really.
And what about bikepacking then? Because I know I mentioned the Shetland Isles trips, but that wouldn't have been your first dip into bikepacking, or was it?
Pretty much was.
Oh, there you go.
Did one overnighter with my brothers down in Dorset like a few weeks before then, but that was I had already planned the Shetland trip and was just getting ready and getting a feel for what extra gear I needed and all this stuff. But it was Shetland was the first kind of multi-night trip I ever did, and haven't really looked back. I absolutely fell in love with it right there and then.
What gave you the idea of that Wheels and Whales ride? What gave you the idea, like the name sounds awesome, but what gave you the idea to strap stuff on your bike and then to take it somewhere as far away as the Shetland Isles and to explore that region there on a bike in that sort of slow travel thing? Like, where did you get the inspiration from?
That is a great question. I mean, mountain biking has always been a big part of my life. I went to university, did a lot of mountain biking, but then was slowly kind of falling out of love with it, just sort of riding the same trails over and over. And a lot of my mates had kind of moved on to other hobbies and got jobs and stuff after finishing uni. So bikepacking seemed like a way of kind of refreshing and reinvigorating my sort of love for cycling. But then on the whale side of Wheels and Whales, always grown up loving whales and kind of killer whales in particular. One of my brothers actually lived out in BC a few years ago. So I'd been out a few years, not related to Shetland, but we'd seen killer whales out there. And, this was kind of 3 or 4 years later, I was like getting the itch again to go see if I can find some killer whales, but didn't really know that we had them in UK waters, and started doing some research and found Shetland was a pretty reliable place to go see killer whales. And I was like, I could kind of try and combine these things. try and find them from a bike. So that was, yeah, how it happened.
I've had a whale experience in Australia back when I was living there.
Hmm.
My husband loved fishing. He had a fishing boat. We would go out, and actually there's an area in Australia on the New South Wales south coast called Eden. It sadly, many, many years ago, not now, it used to actually be a whaling station. That was back way, way back.
Yeah, yeah.
But the marine conservation, it's all like a national marine park there now, and it's amazing to see how invigorated that area is now. But I starkly remember we were fishing off his boat, and these two, like a mother whale and a calf, a baby whale.
Yeah.
Both just breached not too far from the boat, which was equally absolutely amazing, and then in this weird way a bit terrifying.
Yeah. Not that weird. They are hefty things.
But seeing whales, and then, I mean, mesmerised seeing pods of dolphins sort of surfing waves and stuff on the beaches back in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
You never get sick of that, do you?
No, it's next level. I haven't found anything in terms of kind of wildlife encounters that comes close to it, really. They're special things.
So combining the idea, learning that you could see killer whales in the Shetlands then, that sort of thought, I'm going to take a trip there. But why on a bike?
It's just fun. Sounded like a fun adventure. Yeah, I've never really been a huge fan of like driving around places on holiday. Always seems like it takes the fun out of it. You end up half the time thinking about where you're going to park the car and sitting in traffic and all this stuff and paying more to get there and all this nonsense that sort of takes away from the purity of, what the good things you get out of a trip like that, in my mind. And Shetland's a pretty small, it's an archipelago, so there's kind of 60-odd islands, only a handful of them are accessible on foot or on a bike. So it's a fairly small place, and went there for a week or so. I didn't really feel like I would have ran out of land if I took a car, to be honest. I'd just driven around it in half a day. And
yeah. Did you see many other people bikepacking there? Like, is it a popular space for bikepacking?
So I've been twice. I think the second year when I got off the ferry, there were a handful of other bike tours, and we kind of spent the first day or so riding together, which was neat. But I don't think I saw maybe like a couple of people over the first week. I don't think it's particularly popular. It feels pretty hard to get to. I mean, I live down in the south of the UK, so it was like an overnight train to get up to Scotland, Aberdeen, and then an overnight ferry. So it's like 2 and a bit days of travelling to get to somewhere in the UK is kind of a wild thing. It felt like going to Norway or Iceland. It's got a lot of Scandinavian kind of shared heritage. So
yeah, and when you see where it is,
yeah, it's pretty up there.
Very, very up there.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
When I think of it from a bikepacking perspective, the first thing that comes to mind, I mean, I think of an area where it's really open to the elements, where there's an amazing stark beauty about that as well, where you've got this amazing coastline and these wild seas that are sort of whipping up against there. I also think it'd be an area where probably a little bit chilly, but pretty windy. Would I be right in assuming that?
Yeah, I mean, I've only been in the summer, but both times I've been there, it's, pretty high average wind speed. Most days there's a good 30-mile-an-hour breeze blowing over, and if not more. But in the winter, it is like the windiest place in the UK. It gets some high winds. I've been, pretty lucky with weather both times I'm there. And because of the high winds, you kind of look upwind and you see a rain cloud approaching. It blows overhead pretty quick, and you move on to a little patch of sunshine and dark clouds again. It's just a constant cycle, and really quite enjoyed that, actually. It was just like being out in the elements and not having to look at your phone to know what the weather's doing. Just look up in the sky, and there are very few trees up there because there's such high winds. So it's pretty open landscape and got a good view of the sky most of the time. So
some impressive bird life there too.
Yeah, big time. I mean, I've come to learn that over the last few years since going, wherever you're looking for whales, you're more often to end up spending a lot of time around seabirds because they're a lot easier to see, and you spend more time than not looking at birds on the cliffs rather than whales, because they're few and far between relatively.
Is it up there also where, I'm just trying to think of what seabird it is, they're quite large. Like, it's funny, I think of like seagulls, like British seagulls compared to Australian ones. They're just like, I don't know, the British one seems like they're on steroids, but up there's like an even bigger bird. I can't think, is it the tern? I'm not sure, but they swoop as well. Am I thinking of the right place?
Funny you mentioned tern. Terns are quite small, but they do dive bomb and like swoop you quite aggressively. But there's a skewer, it might be what you're thinking of, is a larger bird. They also are quite aggressive and defensive because they sort of nest in the cliffs, I think. So if you get too close, they will dive bomb you and try and scare you away. And
Did you have that experience?
the first time particularly, I went a little later in the summer, and it was like tern breeding season, so there were hundreds of terns, and they make this horrible screeching sound, and they dive bomb to within inch of your head.
Did they ever connect?
I didn't have any contact. I was always wearing my helmet, just even when I was walking around setting up camp and stuff, just in case. But it's quite a baptism by fire. But I didn't, I kind of later realised it's because you're a bit too close to their nest. So if you just give them a bit of space and move on, they start bothering you, which is understandable.
Yeah, it's the exact same in springtime in Australia. We have the magpie, which is a different magpie to what is in the UK.
Right.
It's not the same bird, but it's called the same name.
Yeah.
They also do the same, protecting their young, and I think nesting season lasts for about 8 weeks, and it's not fun. It's really intimidating. But some of them definitely connect, and like they don't just connect with your helmet, like they connect. They go for your eyes, they go for your neck, they nip at your ears. So yeah, they can be quite aggressive.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're well practiced now though. So you could go to Australia in springtime and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, one of my brothers lives out in Australia, so I think possibly a trip out there is on the cards at some point. So I'll bear that in mind.
There is a rule: if you're ever riding with a team of 2 and someone gets swooped by a magpie, like, the rule is you do have to laugh at it, and then it'll start sweeping you, and then they can laugh at you.
Yeah. I guess you're familiar with Chris Burkhardt. I think he lives in Iceland, obviously. I think they have a lot of similar bird life. He shared a tip on one of his stories or something a while ago of just holding a stick or tent pole or something above your head. They'll swoop to the top of the pole rather than closer to your head. So having something you can wave above your head is quite a good tip.
Back in the day, I used to ride with someone who had like, oh gosh, this is so back in the day. It had like a detached radio antenna, you know, the old style ones that were telescopic. He had one that he'd keep with him, and then he'd whip it out to be like a metre long and just ride with it above his head looking like a lunatic. The measures we have to do. I know. If I think about it though, when I think of wildlife and bikes and stuff on this podcast, typically we're talking about, you know, how do you stay away from a pack of wild dogs or, you know, shepherd's dogs that are chasing you somewhere in the Caucasus or something like that. But yeah, the birds, like there is something just heart rate spike inducing of like a bird screeching attack noises and like aiming their beaks directly on your cranium, like, right? So
yeah, but I mean it's quite a cool experience to have in the UK for me anyway, because we have so few animals that present any sort of danger to us. We've killed them all off. So to go up there and to be surrounded by birds for a week and see very few people, hear very few cars, just hear a constant soundtrack of bird life and be quite tangibly involved with their lives in a kind of weird way was quite a cool sort of nature immersion experience, really.
Nature immersion, exactly. And I sort of feel like that with a bikepacking trip. And again, hiking would definitely do this as well. Like you really feel connected to the nature that you're in and that you're moving through, because you feel the inclination of the slopes, you feel the wind, you know, generally on your face, not on your back. You feel the spots of rain, and you really appreciate the vistas that you have earned, I guess. Did you feel that connection then as you were riding your way through the Shetlands? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, obviously out in the elements, and the hills there's nothing crazy. It's kind of a more just generally undulating terrain, so you're nearly always up or down. But yeah, I think there's a statistic where you're never more than 6 miles from a coastline because it's such a kind of long, narrow archipelago. So I was pretty much constantly crossing over coast to coast and just hopping to the next stretch of coastline and then stopping and pulling out the binoculars and see if I could see anything. And there's quite a cool kind of community of whale watchers up there. So people were messaging me saying, "Oh, I've seen something coming up the coast," and I'd ride in the direction of where they're heading and try and anticipate where they'll pop up. And got pretty lucky, saw some amazing whale life within like the first 5 days, and yeah, kind of blew my mind really that was possible in the UK.
That is mega, and it's the sort of memory and experience that you will never sort of forget. Like we can talk about nostalgia when you recall them now, you know, during an interview, but there are also things like there's feelings associated with remembering that as well. Like, you know, it's just like, oh my gosh, and that anticipation of am I going to see something and then actually seeing it, that's mega, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a good number of months kind of planning or, you know, loosely planning the trip and getting excited for it. And then I think it was like day 4 or something, I saw a pod of killer whales and I was like, this is bonkers that you can do this in the UK. You can cycle and see killer whales from the shore, like, you know, 100 meters offshore, and people pay, you know, hundreds if not thousands of pounds for that kind of experience and on the other side of the planet. and it's kind of here, and not many people really know about it. So yeah, it's a lot of emotions flying around when I saw those guys rolling through.
Yeah, it's sort of like, the purpose of your trip is actually,
Yeah,
it's there.
yeah,
Like you're achieving. Nature is one of those things, especially those sort of moments. You can't take it for a given that you're ever going to get them, right?
no, yeah, it's all a roll of the dice, all luck. But yeah, it's pretty special when the stars align and you have a cool experience like that. It's hard to come close to it, really.
And Shetland's obviously something you mentioned you went there again. So you've been at least a couple of times. Is it a sort of place that you can see yourself continually returning to?
Yeah, so I went back to back 2 years in a row. I'd love to go again. I've been thinking about it quite a bit this week, kind of in anticipation of this chat. And yeah, planning the trip out to BC this summer, just kind of thinking about that sort of extended time in nature on the bike. It always takes me back to that first trip. Yeah, no, I'd love to go back. There's still a bunch of islands I haven't been to, and I'd quite like to go without a bike and just do it even slower, just on foot, and bring a backpack and camp out. And I did find myself kind of, like I say, it's quite a small place, so there was a tendency to like want to rack up some miles and move on, maybe more so than I needed to, just because it felt a bit funny just sitting there for too long. So I wanted to move on, and a few times I ended up missing out on seeing something cool because I moved on to the next spot and then got a message saying, "Oh, they're back over here, the whales and dolphins." So it pays to be slow sometimes and just take it in.
Yeah, and I'm guessing, hiking it is quite feasible as well. I mean, in terms of bikepacking it, like, did you research before? Like, is there an actual route in the Shetlands that you followed? Is it so small you don't need your own route because you're going to cover all the roads anyway? Like, How did you actually even feasibly come up with that idea?
There wasn't much of a route involved, really. I sort of got off the ferry on day one and either turn left or right, you go north or south. Decided to go north, I think, and ended up staying north of the ferry terminal the whole time. So the first year I didn't even go to kind of the south of the main island. So that was another like incentive to go back, because there was kind of half of the island to explore still. So yeah, I just kind of took it day by day, and there's a WhatsApp group of like whale watching sighting people. So they send sightings, and a bunch of them tended to be up in the northern part of the islands that first year. So I sort of just planned around them and rode from point to point and sort of had my tent on the bike so I could set up camp anywhere. There's a right to roam up in Scotland, so you can pretty much pitch up wherever you want as long as it's out of sight from people's houses and you keep your camp clean. So didn't have to worry about campsites or anything, just wild camping every night. And yeah, it was mostly on road. There's a few kind of gravelly sections and a lot of hiker bike and carrying bike on my back, but yeah, it was a good adventure. It was good fun, but without any sort of route.
It'd be interesting, actually, because, you were talking about, other than, maybe was it a weekend at Dorset in prep for the Shetland trip, knowing what you've done since, it would be interesting to see how your approach to bikepacking and trips has sort of evolved and changed. Like, what have you changed in terms of how you even carry your gear, to what you're taking with you, to even maybe your routines? Like, if you were to reflect back now to what you've done more recently to those earlier trips, have you seen a change in yourself in terms of preparation and approach to trips and stuff like that?
I mean, the first thing that came to mind as you were saying that was the bikes changed quite a bit. That first trip ended up in me cracking the frame on the bike I was riding.
Oh, so, no!
Yeah, like a couple of days
Rest
before my
peace.
return ferry was due, I pretty much totaled the frame. It was.
What happened? Was it just a crash or?
No, it's so silly. I was riding. It's like kind of a lightweight gravel bike, so pretty much a road frame with chunky tires on, and I had obviously all my camper gear on there, and was riding it down a sort of grassy slope to a camp spot, and just not really paying attention. The sun had gone down. Was ready for a dinner, so just lapse in judgment, dropped the front wheel into a hole, and obviously got the tent on the front, a fair bit of weight. Went over the bars, and then heard a bit of a creaky sound, didn't think much of it, and then sort of walked the bike to camp, set up the tent, cooking dinner, reached into a frame bag, and then spot the whole top tube, down tube, like front triangle was just completely compressed like a beer can, and like fully crumpled. But it didn't crack all the way through, so I ended up kind of coasting it and walking and riding on the bike a little bit over the last couple of days just to get back to the ferry terminal. There was like 80 odd miles of terrain still to cover.
That's a long distance to have to nurse a cracked frame.
Yeah. But it was a steel frame, so steel is real. It held up for a few more days.
Oh no! So hang on, Steelers, were you able to get that welded, or is it rest in peace bike and you've got a different bike now?
It's hanging in my dad's garage. I've been wanting to get it repaired and turn it into like a city cruiser for a while, but I haven't gotten around to it. It's still alive. I think it's still got some life in it, but I think it's got a second life coming when I get around to fixing it up. It would be a cool story to, yeah, weld that thing back together.
Listeners, let's talk saddle comfort for a second. If you have ever squirmed through a ride because your bib shorts weren't cutting it and you were so darn uncomfortable, gosh, do I feel you. I have been there, I have suffered through it, and it is the absolute pits. Well, our sponsor, Red White Apparel, make bib shorts which have really changed that for me. I've been riding in them recently and they just work, even in the heat, even on long climbs, hour after hour. Plus, they're pee-break friendly, which is a huge bonus when you're touring, and I would say as a woman, an absolute non-negotiable when I'm looking for bib shorts. Check them out. I have a link to their website in the show notes. Hit it up and support the brands that support the podcast. Okay, now back to the episode. Ben, that Shetland trip aside, and, something that came across when I was researching and just even speaking to you, it was that idea of nature immersion, how energising and stuff it is.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, as I mentioned in the intro, your partner moved to Vancouver. You couldn't move there, but you did start planning a trip there in the summer. So you had that anticipation of a trip to look forward to. I think you were planning a bikepacking trip.
Mm-hmm.
But you also thought, well, hang on, you needed something in between as well. And so you came up with your idea for what you would do in between. And it's a pretty monumental effort. Like the idea of keeping it local for over 7,000, how many, over 7,500 kilometres. Like that's nuts. Well, how did that idea come to being? Like, was that something you were ruminating on, or how did you get up? I can understand you went to Shetland to go and see killer whales, but the idea of spending 7,500 of adventures just really as local as, how does that work?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't really pinpoint the moment when the idea came into my head, but yeah, so she's now my ex-partner, but that's another story. She moved to Vancouver, and yeah, I was planning on moving at the same time, but a few complications meant I had to stay here, like you said in the intro. But yeah, I knew I was going to go out in the summer and had been involved with this marine mammal conservation group, non-profit in Brighton, called the Sussex Dolphin Project. So I was doing some kind of volunteer work with this group, and it's a small charity, so always looking to raise funds. So I thought I'd try and do something. And there's a kind of weird connection in that the dolphins and whales off the south coast of the UK are some of the kind of least studied animals or marine mammals anywhere in the world, really. And the killer whales and humpbacks off of BC are some of the most studied or most well-studied animals. That's kind of where the birth of sort of modern whale science comes from, is from the biologists off of Vancouver and Vancouver Island studying killer whales. So yeah, I thought it'd be cool to kind of join the dots and physically undertake that journey on the bikes. That's what interests me, aside from marine biology, and in some way kind of visually represent that journey with this kind of 6 months period in between where it was probably going to be quite challenging because my girlfriend was moving to another country, and having a big physical challenge like that is a good way of taking your mind off challenging stuff and giving you something to focus on. That was the motivation and reasoning behind it. But a weird idea to come up with, but ended up being good fun and good challenge. So.
And I imagine something that there's been so many positives that you've drawn out of it since, no less just learning about where you live a little bit more too. When we're talking about nature immersion, I'm not saying you didn't know, your local beaches, your local area, your local coastline, but 7,500 kilometres of pedaling through, even further afield, you start to really get a better feel visually, but also, I guess, immersively, for lack of a better word, of what that actually represents and what's there as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest thing was just like the sheer time of sitting on a saddle and having to be outside. I've always thought of myself as being quite a keen cyclist, and spent a lot of my weekends doing that kind of stuff. But just to hit those numbers, I had to pretty much every day, before work and after work and at the weekends, just big hours on the bike, and just there's no chance to not be aware of how the seasons are changing and how the, conditions are changing and know which way the wind's coming from. Even something as simple as that is like an element of nature connection, is just being in touch with what the weather's doing in a bit more of a tangible way, like I said, without having to pull out your phone and check the forecast.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, yeah, discovered a lot of pretty amazing trails and road routes and stuff close to home, and saw a lot of wildlife just through being outside for that amount of time. So yeah, it was good fun.
If I was to ask you to tell me some things that you didn't know about that you discovered as part of this?
That's a good question. Didn't know about. I mean, one of the kind of weirdest experiences of it that I wasn't expecting at all was seeing the Northern Lights, like a couple of hours from home in the south of the UK. We had some freak activity with the Northern Lights last year. A lot of Europe saw it, but yeah, it was I think a Friday night after finishing work. Hopped on the train and rode up into the hills and set up camp. I was just lying in the woods and started seeing the sky just going crazy colours through the canopy of the woods I was in, and yeah, kind of bonkers experience just to happen across.
Times where nature makes you feel teeny tiny, right?
Yeah, big time. And probably the other end of the spectrum to that, back actually in a very similar part of Dorset to where I had my first kind of bikepacking experience. I went back to that same stretch of coast and rolled out my bivvy bag on this little cliff ledge, was ready to go to bed, and 3 or 4 puffins just rocked up. Atlantic puffins, which I had no idea you could see in Dorset. I've seen them in other parts of the UK, but turns out there's pretty much one family left of puffins on that little cliff ledge. They nest beneath the ledge, and I just happened to be setting up camp there and spent the whole evening with 3 puffins just rolling around in the sea, having a good time.
I've not experienced being able to see them myself yet. It's on my bucket list, but
stunning creatures, yeah, and pretty iconic. I mean, they're probably one of, if not the most iconic species we have in the UK, full stop, and people obviously travel from all over to come see them. They're cute little things.
How big is a puffin? Like, is it like 30 centimetres, like a foot, or is it...
Smaller than that. They were surprisingly small. I think the first time I saw them, that was one of the main things, was just how small they are. They're smaller than a pigeon. I don't know, probably 20 centimetres tall or something if they stand up. It's, yeah, pretty small little bird, but they're so powerful and kind of stocky. They're fast little flyers and hopping around off cliffs, and they're sort of dive bombing down into the water to go catch fish, and then they'll come back to their nest and constantly on the move. And then when they're waddling around on land, they look like little penguins, just being a bit clumsy, but very endearing.
Much like the Northern Lights, when you're talking about this one family there in Dorset, like, what were the chances of you ever coming across them? Exactly,
yeah. Yeah, pretty kind of serendipitous, and I think just I had a lot of those kind of weird little like encounters with animals like badgers and stuff, where it's just a numbers game where you spend that much time outside and at weird times, and particularly by yourself where you're not making much noise. Wildlife does just kind of present itself to you, in my experience. If you get lucky and you spend enough time outside, it's pretty special.
There's rhythms to it as well, and I came across a quote of yours, and it sort of gave me a sense of that as well. This is sort of setting off back with the Shetland trip in mind. You were like, Wheels and Whales started out as a somewhat tongue-in-cheek name I gave to an experiment of combining my 2 greatest yet wildly disconnected passions of cycling and marine biology. A few years on, however, it's morphed into something beyond simply using a bike as a tool for seeing incredible beings and places. It's a way of exploring what it means to give my love of moving my body in the outdoors a greater purpose. But using my time on the bike deepens my awareness and love of wilder things still left in this world. Greater purpose still, aiming to introduce a degree of reciprocity. Oh gosh, I can't say that word. Yeah. There we go. And respect into how I do what I enjoy most. Giving something back to the places and persons that give us also much, humans and otherwise. But you also then went on to sort of talk about this idea of being in the rhythms of nature and being really aware of those sort of things as well. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing you had hints of that in the Shetlands, but that was also something that came to you on this bigger journey locally as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a bit of a wordy sentence I strung together there. I didn't realise. Never read it out loud. So.
It's a big paragraph actually, but it was worth reading out loud. I think there's a lot of power to it too, though.
Yeah, no.
Even if I can't say reciprocity.
Yeah, it's this powerful word.
Say it 10 times.
Well, it's been on my mind a lot. I think since Canada last year, it's been kind of making more of an effort to learn more about the kind of indigenous peoples there and their sort of worldviews. and the historic worldviews and approaches to nature, and this idea of, humans not being above, but just on the same level as every other species, and our responsibility is to be kind of stewards and not just constantly take from the natural world. It's reciprocity, is give something back, and trying to find ways of incorporating that into a life here in the UK in the 21st century is an interesting idea, but I think it's an important one, and I think it's something people should be considering. It's just, we are nothing without the natural world. We're all part of nature. We are a natural species when it comes down to it. We need every other species to be healthy and the ecosystems to be alive.
I think we live in a time where we know that more starkly than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And we should know it more starkly than ever. Like, we have the time with so much technology to let us know about all these things. But it still pains me sometimes that it's the odd one out that the spotlight shone on. Like your story, it's not necessarily the odd one out, but it's, maybe there are millions of Ben Boxers out there doing these type of things, but we don't really hear about it.
Mm.
There is power in sharing stories like this to sort of show that element of, there's defeatism about our environmental state at a global level, but it's bringing it back to that individual level and what can you do about it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, think global, act local, that's what they say, isn't it? It's, no truer words.
I always remember, and it wasn't in this case, it was a workplace I worked with back in Australia. It was like in an NGO type of sort of space, or not for profit rather.
Mm-hmm.
And their sort of thing, it was all about community services, and it was like, do good, feel good, real good. As in, do something good, you're going to feel good about it. And it's also really good as well. It's that type of thing too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying do what you're doing just so that you can feel good about yourself, but there is an element where that does happen as well. Like, it actually, you can see a tangible difference that you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no worse way to feel bad than just reading bad news about the way the world's going and not doing anything about it. And it's quite a nice thing to do, is just find something local that you can have an effect, a positive direct impact that you can see the effects of, and get out there and do it. And, it's a chance to leave your phone at home and not think about global affairs, because they're pretty easy to get depressed by.
Can I ask, on the flip side, when you set yourself a challenge like this, sometimes I think, God, I don't know if the word easy is right, but would there have been an easy element of you were on a big 7,500 point-to-point ride where you're moving tangibly through a distance day by day, and you can sort of look on a map at where you've been, as opposed to how you did it? When you were saying you pretty much had to get out before and after work,
Mm-hmm.
weekends, it was a given to do the distances that you needed to do. Did it feel like a burden? Were there times where you just didn't want to do it anymore?
I mean, if you break down the numbers, it's not like, I think if I had done it consistently, it would have been like 200k or something a week. It's not insane, and particularly if I'd done most of that on the road. But my background's in mountain biking. I've never really had hardly used Strava until last January when I started the challenge. So I didn't really have a feel for what kind of numbers I was hitting anyway. It ended up being quite a big step up in sort of volume. But yeah, I took the first sort of few months fairly easy. And then, so it was really only like kind of 3 months of pretty intense riding just to ramp up. Because that was around springtime, weather started getting better, days were starting getting longer. I started doing more weekenders and overnighters. So adding a degree of like adventure and discovering new places aside from just riding on the road for hours. I think if I'd done that, it wouldn't have been quite so engaging and compelling. Probably would have thrown in the towel. But yeah, I'd tried to do most of it off-road, and yeah, a lot of the time had camping gear on the bike just to make it interesting.
Add in some micro mini adventures
exactly.
as well.
Yeah.
Was it mainly just weekenders when you could, or were you able to spring like a week away or something like that into this as well?
No, I mean, I spent over 4 weeks out in Canada last summer, so I pretty much banked all my holiday with my job. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I was working full time, so I didn't really have time to do that. It's just bank holidays and weekends, or public holidays. Yeah, so they were all kind of weekends or 3 days max. Little mini adventures.
Mini adventures are great though, and they're great for keeping the stoke high. There's also a mental health aspect to it as well. I sort of hinted, and actually to be fair, this is how we first got in touch, which was more around the topic of post-adventure blues.
Yeah.
When you're planning something like, I'm going to have 4 weeks in Vancouver and I'm going to have an awesome trip there, but also being mindful of the fact that I'm at home in the meantime and I don't want to be down in the dumps about that. But equally, I don't want to really be down about returning back home when that trip's over. So having that in your mind when you set off on something is one thing. But have you noticed the impacts mentally of doing what you did in that positive way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, prior to going out to Vancouver, it was just a big help. I mean, it was a challenging time with my partner moving out. That sort of drive and purpose was a big win for kind of mental health and all those things. But yeah, like you say, returning, I think otherwise it is a case of you're looking forward to this trip and then it's over. You're kind of left looking through photos and planning the next one. That's how I've experienced it in the past. You go through a little bit of a period of post-adventure blues. But yeah, there still was an element of that. There was a kind of, what do I do next? Obviously had a lot of purpose leading up to the trip, had a great trip, come back, a little bit deflated and not really knowing what to do with myself. But yeah, quickly started planning kind of what I'm doing now, which is a sort of follow-on fundraising challenge activity and kind of extension of just really an excuse to spend as much time as possible outside in local nature and having relatively adventurous experiences close to home. Yeah, so that's where I am now. I'm doing this similar thing.
I was thinking the challenge of, all those micro adventures that you had in that other journey, the huge benefit that I see is you just get this bigger appreciation and fondness for the area around you as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There's an element of post-adventure blues, isn't there, where it hits people harder when they're dissatisfied with what they're returning to.
Mm-hmm.
And, an end of a holiday, it's pretty obvious, like being free from work constraints and all of those things. A holiday goes without saying. Generally, it's a lovely time. You're going somewhere that's energizing for you, and then all of a sudden it's a return back to the routine. So there's the downer on that. But if it's a case that you're happy with where you are and you're seeing your local areas in that new light and appreciation, I wonder whether the likelihood of it being such a downer is a little bit less.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah, and I think there's kind of, the two elements of what we're talking about. There's the adventure side, but also the kind of nature immersion side. It's easy to go to a place like coastal British Columbia and see whales and bears and all these amazing wildlife, and then to come back to the UK where we don't have a lot of that, and to feel pretty down about the state of things. But having spent, the prior 6 months out having cool experiences close to home, it's a different scale of epic adventure and nature, but there's possibility in every day and at the weekend from the front door, which is a nice thing to have. I've always kind of felt it, but never really experienced it on that same continuous level and scale as doing it for 6 months pretty continuously.
Yeah. I know that, and we'll talk about what you're currently doing, which is a step change and a bit different to what you were doing prior to Vancouver and prior to that trip. But I wonder, do you now just, were there, how do I want to phrase this? I'm assuming that not every ride was a different ride, that there were times where you were riding the same place, right?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe then also equally, there were times maybe where you were doing the same overnighter. Is there a mini adventure that you go, oh, I've got 2 days this weekend, or it was a bank holiday last weekend, I'm going to have an overnighter here. That was really fun and I'm going to go back there. Is that how you sort of think about things maybe now as well?
A little bit, yeah. I've started to get some pretty reliable sort of wild camping spots in mind that are always quite almost comforting to return to. It's I can go back to this place, and at different times of the year, different conditions, they feel different, but it's just one variable is kind of where you're doing this stuff. It's the time of year, the weather, the people you're with, the vehicle with which you get to those places. I'm doing a lot of hiking and paddleboarding at the moment, less cycling, but having similar experiences in similar places. But because I've switched up that variable of taking out the bike, adding in something else, or using a different bike, I'm fortunate enough to have 3 bikes where I was kind of chopping and changing between the 3 of them, but doing similar rides or shared, parts of those rides would be shared between them. But that's the great thing about cycling. There's so many different things you can chop and change to keep it interesting and novel, aside from feeling like you have to hop on a plane to go have fun.
Last year was the first time where, and I run a podcast interviewing bike travelers and adventurers, and my gosh, sometimes something that could get you quite down in the dumps is when you're interviewing people week in, week out on amazing journeys, and you know that you don't have a scope to take one for ages. So it's like constant FOMO feeding, right?
Yeah, I bet.
I could look at it the other way and going, I've got an inspiring bucket list that keeps on going, but you sort of want to you do want to start ticking it.
Mm-hmm.
But in a nod to Al Humphreys, who I've mentioned already during this episode, last year was the first year where I really embraced that concept of micro adventures, but not just on the bike. Like, I love camping, I love wild camping, but rather than just being day in, day out pedaling, it was also not needing to do a massive ride, but riding somewhere where I was going to do an amazing hike. And that was really energizing, and that's that nature immersion point of view as well. You can have these great mini adventures that fill the Stoke and Wanderlust just as much as visiting a different country, but you're having them in your own backyard.
Absolutely. I mean, Al Humphreys is a big inspiration, and a lot of the things that feel quite important to me he's spoken about and written about in some detail. So yeah, big fan. But yeah, to your point, if you're constantly kind of relying on bigger scale traditional adventures, capital A adventures, where you're going on a plane, you're out for multiple weeks, you've got time off work, all these things that are amazing and special, but they are, we all have jobs, we all have to make a living. They're few and far between, maybe once or twice a year, if you're lucky, you get to have those kind of experiences. If you're constantly relying on that, it's just a recipe for feeling either like longing and wishing for greener grass and looking forward and not really living in the moment, which is not a thing anybody really wants to do. You want to appreciate every moment and the people and the places you're with in the current moment. Yeah, the idea of micro adventures and having something that can scratch that itch of a kind of novel experience and a physical experience on a bike closer to home, if you're able to change something if that's required to make it interesting and appealing, or just go somewhere new but accessible by car or public transport, or just from your front door with a bike. That's an amazing thing, and yeah, something that's pretty important to me, really.
Because you're right, we can't be doing the capital A things all the time. I mean, I've interviewed people who seemingly are doing that, but there are also sacrifices with being perpetually doing that as well.
Yeah, of course.
I don't feel it's a win-win with those situations either. I think the idea that you can be stoked about where you live and seek out those energizing times in nature, even locally, is phenomenal. Finding the family of puffins on the Dorset coastline, or going up into the woods and having the most amazing Northern Lights experience, or maybe it's just even an overnighter with a couple of mates. That's pretty cool too.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, like, if we're really honest with ourselves, like, there's the sacrifices that you have to make in your personal life, but the impact of a flight is hard to get away from, and is an absolute luxury that's quite unique to people who are alive today, like 100 years ago, and probably 100 years from now. It's probably not going to be a luxury in the same way as paying under 100 quid to go on a flight for a few hours. It's a ridiculous impact relative to the burden it has on the individual. It's not sustainable in any sort of way. Ultimately, there's no getting away from it. So that was also another motivation for what I did last year, was like, kind of know that I'm going to take this flight to see my partner. Didn't feel great about that, but wanted to, I've used the word kind of offset the impact. It's obviously not a direct offset. There's still a net negative impact of paying towards emissions from a plane, but having some kind of way of raising a bit of money for a local cause, trying to do something to conserve local nature, but also just like getting more from the experience. If you go on a trip to wherever, you can either extend the time you're there to get more from it, or kind of extend the impact it has on your own life, if that makes sense. It's hard to know how to do that. Obviously, it depends on the experiences you have once you're there. That can have a lasting impact once you come back. It often does. Having kind of adventures, you come back a slightly different person. But doing this thing ahead of time, it gave me 6 months of thinking about the trip, really considering, what I wanted to get out of it, and kind of physically and also sort of kind of mentally, and I was literally plotting week by week the distance along the flight path as I was riding that distance.
So it was sort of connecting and bridging the gap in a way.
Big time, and really put into perspective.
It's a different countdown.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then hopped on a plane and was over in 9 hours. That took me 6 months of pretty hard graft.
Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Listeners, obviously I'm an Aussie, but I'm lucky and fortunate. I've made a life choice. I live in France, but I do return home to Australia. I have family there. And my gosh, like the burden of those long haul flights, I still wrestle with how to deal with that. I make sacrifices in other areas to try and compensate for it, but as you say, you never really do. But the idea that it takes a full day of flying to get from France to Australia is nuts. Like, it's 22, 23 hours of flight time and constantly looking out the window, like looking at this land whiz by. I'm really more conscious of it now that I've interviewed people who've ridden this distance,
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it is bonkers. Now, I don't mean to make you or anyone feel bad. I mean, I'm going out to Canada again in the summer or in a month's time or so. And there is still an element of, we live in a global society. People have family, like you say, in other parts of the world. There's a requirement to some level to still undertake flights for the time being. But how can you kind of eke more out of those experiences if you do have to go? But also doing this local stuff, it really kind of makes hopping on a plane seem less appealing.
Well, I was going to say there is that aspect of it as well, right? Like there is the aspect of, and I notice this so much more living in Europe than I do in Australia, in that the appeal of, I can get a cheap Ryanair, 20 quid flight to go somewhere. I can be in another total European country and actually feasibly make it work for a weekend away. Or if I have these local adventures, they're just as energizing. And I'm not going and experiencing a new culture maybe necessarily, but I'm actually still filling my own cup and energizing myself by being out there without doing it. So I guess there is that conscious effort as well that micro adventures can actually, if I tangibly put it into words, is it the concept that micro adventures can leave us with the same feelings? Mm-hmm. It's that feeling that we're after and that hit from an adventure. You don't necessarily need to hop on a flight to get it.
I think so. I think you can come close, and if you can get 90% of the way there in terms of whatever you're searching for in an adventure in another country, but without having that same, there's a kind of a huge step up in the impact you're having on the planet as soon as you step on a plane, regardless of the distance, just from the nature of it. I think there's something to be said from just trying to find ways to keep the international travel to as a minimum as possible, whilst still trying to satisfy whatever you're trying to satisfy closer to home.
Listeners, if you're planning a bike tour, a holiday, or maybe even heading to an event on the other side of the country and you want to avoid the hassles of flying with your bike, then Bike Flights is a service well worth looking into. They specialise in bike shipping and making it easy to send your bike safely door to door, especially for international travel when, let's face it, flying with a box bike is stressful and can often feel like too much. There's a link in the show notes if you want to learn more, and if you do book through that link, it also helps support me and the podcast out at no extra cost to you. Okay, now back to the episode. Question for you. When you were living this sort of project challenge, and I'm not sure if it took 6 months or however many months it did take, and you're sort of doing these things and there's that sort of anticipation but also satisfaction of, ticking the miles off and seeing the distance in that sort of visual representation like you said. What about when you were in Vancouver doing the other journey that you were planning as well? Do you feel like they were the same feelings you were getting at the end of each of those sort of days? Like you're obviously in different scenery and you're having a different experience there in BC, but did you feel that you were still getting the same sort of feelings from what you were physically doing and I guess mentally doing as well?
I mean, it is similar. I think Al Humphreys talks about it quite well. It's like a lot of trips, wherever you are, there is a degree of monotony and repetition to it. It's like, if you're doing a bike journey, there's a decent chunk of your time is just going to be sitting there on the saddle pedaling. If the weather's bad, particularly, scenery doesn't really have a huge amount of impact. If you're on a road, even more so, it's just cars whizzing by. If there's traffic, could be anywhere in the world when you're doing that. It's just hours spinning your legs and
in your own head too.
Exactly. There's a lot of time. There is a lot of time in your own head, and obviously that takes away from the external element of where you are. But obviously, there are amazing experiences I had out there, meeting new people and learning about the culture there that obviously you can't have without going in the same way. But there is a lot of shared overlap, and just doing something physically quite tough wherever you are, it's a good feeling once you're on the other side of it.
Yeah, there's a satisfaction and maybe a distinct level of pride attached to it too.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I think you definitely deserve to be proud of is those sort of conservation efforts that you've put together with these sort of things. And you sort of hinted that this year you're doing something a little bit different, that you're hiking, paddleboarding and cycling. But you're not just doing those physical activities. You're also out there cleaning up the beaches. Like you're actually picking up litter and you're taking it away and those sort of things. You're fundraising for conservation projects as well. How energising has it been adding that element in to what you're doing as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been cool. It's something I've thought about for a while, is like, how can you know, my number one thing I want to do when I'm not working is hang out with mates and ride my bike. But at a certain point that feels a little bit empty when you start learning more about some of the challenges that, you know, I've loved coastal environments and sort of marine wildlife. There's a lot of challenges that those sort of places and wildlife are facing, and increasingly so. How can I in some way bring those two things together, regardless of the scale of that impact? It's mostly just friends and family I'm sort of like speaking to, but I am a big believer in like just doing your bit, and the more you talk about it, and the butterfly effect is real, I think. So yeah, it's been cool, and added a lot more kind of sense of active purpose this year, introducing this like beach cleaning element. Aside from doing the fun outdoorsy stuff and the adventurous stuff, is like there's just a certain element of getting a bit grubby and picking up rubbish actually feels quite good, and it's a very tangible way of, prior to doing that compared to afterwards, the beaches and the sea is in a little bit of a cleaner state, you know, and that's a very nice way of feeling quite connected to not just the nice elements of nature, but the more you become connected to the issues that nature on your doorstep is facing, I think that's an important piece of the puzzle as well.
Well, I imagine there's also a vocal element to it as much as a visual element to it as well. And vocal in that the stories that you're telling to, you know, your mates, your friends, your colleagues, to what you're sharing on your social media, the experiences that you've had, there is that little bit of osmosis that happens too, potentially. Like, have you noticed what you're doing has had a bit of a flow-on effect with those people that you're around with as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've met so many people this year just through the kind of beach cleaning aspect. I've kind of discovered quite a strong community in pretty much most towns around me on the south coast of kind of volunteers and people actively engaged with cleaning up beaches, just with kind of this shared passion for giving something back and cleaning your local environment. And yeah, I met a lot of lovely people who are into that stuff, but also, yeah, with people I already knew. Just because it's what I'm talking about on social media, we just naturally, a lot of the time, the conversations steer towards these kind of topics, and just had some really cool chats with people who I didn't think this was their cup of tea, thinking about this stuff or talking about it. And yeah, you do start to, I don't know, it's just kind of thinking about, because you can go to the beach and enjoy, you know, looking at the sea or going for a swim and see a bit of rubbish floating by and not really do anything about it. But as soon as you like stop and really consider and try and do something to solve that problem, it's a bit more of a deeper way of engaging with a place and connecting with people doing that same thing.
I guess there's also that visual aspect of even strangers seeing you doing that, or strangers seeing, you know, one of these organisations doing it. There's also an element of sometimes you need your eyes opened up to what's out there. Like, I imagine since you started doing it, you found a lot of these places do exist where you can be part of and that you can do things. But before that, you might have been oblivious to. I'm sure there's people listening to this now thinking in that way. What would you encourage people to do if they want to get involved in these type of projects?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I live in Brighton on the south coast, and I moved here 3 or 4 years ago, and prior to moving here, didn't even know we could see dolphins or whales in the channel. It's such a busy stretch of water. I thought it was devoid of any kind of wildlife that's mentionable or notable. So when I first moved here, I don't know, someone might have told me that you could see dolphins off of Brighton, and I just Googled like Brighton dolphins and then found this charity who are researching and promoting and trying to do something to protect the dolphins here. That's just an example. Whatever kind of element of nature that interests you, just talk to people and give it an internet Google. We can learn a lot from a 5-minute Google around what people are up to in the local area. Don't know if I've got any better advice than that, really.
When I was scrolling through some of your social posts, as I do for all guests that I interview, you know, something I came up with I think it was just week 10 of your 2025 challenge, or I think it was week 10. I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me. But I think you tipped the scales of collecting 0.5 ton of waste on your litter collection. What are you up to now?
Yeah, so it's connected to what I did last year. Last year was the distance of the flight between London and Vancouver. That number, like you say, it's about 7,500 kilometres. I wanted to do something similar because I'm going back out there again in July. But yeah, it was pretty not so keen to do, the same thing or do a purely bike-related thing just because it was a lot of cycling last year and I was pretty ready to do something slightly different just to keep it interesting. So I'm doing that same number divided by 10, so it's like 759 kilometres, doing that on foot, so hiking, and then on a paddleboard, which was new to me as a sport as of January, and is a pretty humbling speed to start eating away at that number.
Starting paddleboarding in December as well, as an Aussie, blows my mind. Like the idea that you're heading out on the water in winter in the UK.
Yeah,
but then you guys swim in your beaches, and that blows my mind too, because the water temperature is frigid.
That was kind of a wild, nature experience. Actually, my first day of paddleboarding in 2025 was one of my first days ever. It was back home. I'm from Essex in the UK, and there's a creek which is brackish water, sort of estuary, and there was literal icebergs out there. It was iced over and there was ice floating around in the creek. And I was like, this is wild to have this kind of paddleboarding through ice and sort of breaking through ice. Felt like being in the Arctic. It was a crazy experience. And yeah, didn't want to fall in.
You know what it takes me, but I've not paddleboarded yet. But a weird, unique experience. 5 years ago, I was living in Ireland. I got I got stuck there because lockdown and COVID happened just when we got there. Mm-hmm. During the wintertime, I was fortunate enough to be living on the Irish Sea, so I could go for a walk on the Irish Sea, and I remember it was a frigid, really, really cold overnight winter spell. I think it was -9 or something, and the estuary had frozen over. Mm-hmm. But I remember walking on the the low tide sand flats, and there was a layer of ice on the sand, and you'd sort of glide on the ice and see a little bit of sand and water underneath it moving. That was really weird. I don't know if you've experienced that before, but it's not a phenomenon I knew existed.
No, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I still have a really dodgy mobile phone video of it that I rip out every now and then.
I bet it was making some cool sounds as well.
I did nearly go ass up in synchronized slipping was what my husband and I were going to call it when this wasn't on the beach, this was on the pavement. Well, the pavements were too icy, so we were actually walking on the road, and both of us just nearly went wee at the same time. So, which you can laugh about now.
Yeah.
Probably would have broke our tailbones had we connected. Anyway.
Yeah. No,
gosh.
Before I forget, so there's the hiking and the paddleboarding legs, and then there's also this beach cleaning aspect of it, which we've spoken about. So trying to hit that same number, so 760 kilograms rather than kilometres, obviously, of largely plastic off of beaches, quite local to me. So almost at that number, really, I think.
Does it blow your mind that you're that close to it already?
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of eased off in recent weeks. It was the focus in sort of winter and early spring was trying to ramp up the beach cleaning was, because obviously, it's, like you say, it's less appealing to go out on the paddleboard when it's grim weather, but quite easy to go for a walk along a beach and pick up some rubbish. So yeah, I spent a lot of time in the first half of this year, or first quarter or so, and pretty quickly realised how kind of depressingly easy it was not easy, but attainable it was to hit that number, because I didn't really have a feel for how realistic it was setting that goal back in January. I've never done a few beach cleans before, but never weighed how much rubbish I was collecting in a session. But there's a lot of commercial fishing activity in the channel, so a lot of it is kind of heavyweight fishing gear and a lot of plastic nets and stuff, which are really nasty materials to have floating around in the water. But as soon as they wash up to shore, they're relatively easy to haul up, and we've got quite a good recycling infrastructure in the country for fishing nets, so they can be turned into plastic products quite readily, which is quite a cool kind of almost a supply chain to be a part of in a small way, is physically retrieving this material and giving it a second life in a new form that isn't having a destructive impact like it was, as a fishing net, and particularly as a ghost net. Once it's floating around, it's just wreaking havoc on the ecosystem.
Wow, I wonder when you'll hit that magic number.
Soon, I think, for the beach clean.
But I sort of feel like it's probably the more likely number where you're not necessarily going to just stop doing what you're doing because you've hit it, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I can't see myself going back. It's like I'm doing it on the paddleboard now. It's like any sort of floating rubbish that's I paddle past, just like slightly diverting to go scoop it up. It's hard to see stuff now and miss it and move on. I've always cared about the ocean and the wildlife, but spending that much time thinking about it and actively doing it, it's hard to go back.
Ben, it should go without saying, like, you're dead set legend. Like, honestly, it is awesome. I know you don't come on this show to be told that.
No, I appreciate that.
Hopefully there's people listening to this who, A, have either done exactly what you're doing, or B, are possibly inspired to do something a bit like that as well. I know certainly a lot of people go wild camping, and, you know, the principles of taking our rubbish back with us should go without saying, but I'd certainly know lots of people who will take their own rubbish and the rubbish that they find there away as well. So there's little things do add up. Sometimes it can feel like it's not making an impact because it feels small, but, you know, putting it all, like, every time you litter picked, is that the word? I'm not sure. But every time you did a beach clean, you know, it might have only been a small amount, but look at this. You can reflect back and you've hauled over half a ton. You're on the way of 3/4 of a ton of rubbish cleaned. Like, that is a tangible amount of doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, a lot of people raise the point of like, it's, you know, it's quite a high number, but it's still nothing in the grand scheme of things. But in my mind, like, I work in sustainability sort of consulting in my 9 to 5 and sort of in some way contributing to solving the problem of like, how can we move away from these materials? How can we set up businesses and infrastructure around not having to rely on single-use plastics and these kind of things? That's one part of the problem, is like cutting off the supply of this material and these kind of things. But there is just a huge amount of this stuff floating around the sea and in our rivers that needs to be collected one way or another if we're going to return to a healthier world. You know, it needs to be done by someone, and it's quite an easy sort of community level problem to solve. Doing a beach clean, cleaning up your local park, those kind of things, very straightforward. And people actually, in my experience, enjoy them quite a lot. I've grown to enjoy it as an activity, just like a slightly different way of being outside, not being so physical, or being physical in a different way. It can be surprisingly physical if there's like a heavy net you're hauling out. It's not something I think of as being fun, but like when you're not feeling it, a big bike ride or a hike or something, you know, going out and looking at a beach a little bit more closely and bending over and picking up stuff, not a bad activity. That kind of sounds quite strange, but
No, but to me, it reminds me of that little quote I whipped out: do good, feel good, real good. Like, it is all connected to that. And I imagine that there's times where there's a community element that comes along with it as well, where perhaps you're not doing it on your own, but there's a group of you doing it, and there is that awesome community bonding impact around it as well. Absolutely. I think it's having a super tangible difference, no different to the fact that we could be defeatist about it, but it's also, you know, when you were talking about there's a family of 3 puffins that live on the Dorset coastline, you know, that's the sort of endangered level that we have where we just become defeatist and do nothing about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is making a difference.
Absolutely.
Well, I think you should be super damn proud of it too.
That's very kind of you to say. Thank you very much.
Gosh, I hope this doesn't sound, it's not superficial, but something that I did want to ask about was, you mentioned Strava, and I saw Strava art from you in the shape of a dolphin. I want to know more about this, because I've seen Strava art before, and I've seen people do all sorts of things in Strava art.
Yeah.
Is the dolphin something that you did?
Uh-huh.
And was it one ride? Was it a group of rides? I want to know about it.
Yeah, sure. No, that was definitely a highlight from last year. So that was part of the fundraising thing last year. It was just like thinking up ways to make rides a little bit more engaging. How can I hit these big numbers but not do the same thing? And it was, I think, National Dolphin Day or something. And yeah, volunteering with this dolphin charity and fundraising for the dolphin charity. So I thought it would be cool to try and do a ride in the shape of a dolphin. I started plotting it out on a map and quite quickly realized that I had to make it quite a big route to make it look anything like a dolphin, with the kind of network of bridleways and footpaths and roads that we have here in the UK.
20 miles wasn't going to cut it.
I've done a few iterations as somewhere on my phone. I've got a screenshot of the different versions of the dolphin like route, and they just progressively get more and more like a dolphin. The first couple are just unrecognizable.
It's a bit like a constellation, you know, like the astrology or the stars when you're looking up and you go, that's meant to be a scorpion?
Yeah. No, so I was pretty chuffed with how it turned out, to be honest. It was a single ride. I think it was probably one of the most physical days. I think it was maybe like 140k, but a lot of it was walking on footpaths because there are only so many bridleways and roads where you can legally ride a bike on. And it was like late March or something, winter, so the ground was pretty soggy. So walking through boggy fields on footpaths, carrying my bike for 12, 13 hours and doing a bit of cycling in between. And yeah, somehow carved out this shape of a dolphin, and Strava didn't crash on me, which was quite a good result.
Oh yeah, the best thing is uploading it and seeing there's no gaps.
Yeah. There's one, if you zoom in, there's a tiny little notch, and it's like
no zooming in.
Or something. Yeah, where I had to divert. Yeah.
No one's zooming in, or we'll just get paint out and just put a little line on that. I will definitely post a photo of it, listeners, and I think it's damn impressive. Something else to be proud of, Ben.
Yeah, it was a bit quirky, but a good day out, and yeah, it was good fun.
Something I also want to do is give you a special shout out for your fundraisers. You are fundraising at the moment. Who are you fundraising for? Let us all know. And listeners, I will put a direct link in the show notes. So in the episode, go into your podcast player, click on the episode. You'll see a description all about Ben and his challenge, and you'll see some links there. And one of them will be these. Tell us about your fundraisers.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, that would be much appreciated. So yeah, this year it's all for the Marine Conservation Society. So they are, the UK is kind of leading marine conservation, so UK-wide group. They work a lot with the government and universities doing kind of research and informing regulation of the fishing industry and looking at ways to reduce plastics and forever chemicals and all these nasty things we have in our seas, and yeah, doing vital kind of community engagement and education with school children around this is wildlife we have left and what can we do about it on a community level to protect it. So pretty multifaceted approach to marine conservation. That's what I'm fundraising for. So yeah, any support from listeners would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for giving it a little shout out.
More than happy to do that. And listeners, as I said, I'm going to stick it in the podcast show note description as well. Ben, time to wrap the show up. And I do it asking my guests the same 3 questions. The first one's music related. You are a guest to Seek Travel Ride, which means you get to go and pick a song that appears on the Seek Travel Ride music playlist. Listeners, it's there on Spotify and Apple, and I've got links for that again in the show notes too. Ben, what song are you going to pick that's going to be the soundtrack to your adventures?
That's a good question. I listened to one of your podcasts before or earlier today, so I knew this was coming, so I have given it a little bit of thought. Like I say, I've been thinking about that Shetland trip quite a bit lately, and a song that stands out was one, I don't know if I played it or listened to it shortly after seeing that first pod of killer whales, and it stands out as being like a song that I relate to that memory quite closely, is a song called Anthem by Greta Van Fleet. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a groovy tune.
Oh, I haven't, but I'm going to listen to it straight after this. And so when you listen to that now, does it take you straight back to the Shetlands?
Yeah, it does, big time. And I think I might have put it, I made a little video about that trip, and I think I might have put it like after because it really felt like I worked pretty hard to get to the point where I could see them, and then really just like saw them and was very like emotionally overwhelmed and sort of collapsed on the beach and just lay there listening to this song. It was like big kind of crescendo. Yeah, so really associates.
Without trying to sound weird, I've just got goosebumps, so that's awesome.
Yeah, that's cool.
Anthem by Greta Van Fleet, you are there. Next question. This is more bike related. You're given a choice one day, Ben Boxer. You can turn left and you will have to cycle continuously, constantly on a never-ending corrugated washboard road. There's no respite. There's no, metre or 2 of smooth. Or you can turn right and be met up with a horrendous headwind that is also relentless. Which one are you choosing?
I mean, I hate a headwind, but I think I'd probably go with that option. There's something about living on the coast. I've come to realize, like, nearly always on a ride, there's a headwind involved. And I have somewhat grown to like it, as it's something we've spoken about. It's like a way of just feeling the elements on your face in a way that riding over washboard does not give me that same satisfaction. It's not enjoyment, but there's some element of it which I do quite. It's maybe like type 2 enjoyment, riding into a nasty headwind that is different to lumpy slow riding.
There's a sense of achievement there. I always remember we spoke about Al Humphreys. I remember in his episode, he sort of joked about probably the worst thing would be if you had a tailwind on the washboard, you wouldn't be able to enjoy it. I thought, I'm sure Al has. But
that sounds
alrighty. Final question for you, Ben, and I want you to finish this sentence for me, and that is, I want you to tell me that what what is the best thing about taking a bike adventure?
Oof, that is a great question. What is the best thing about taking a bike adventure? To me, it's just, it's a vehicle for experiencing local wildlife, or not even local, just a way of kind of forcing you into spending pretty close to 24/7 or however long your trip is outside, using your body to propel you and moving at a very natural pace, a very kind of the way people are meant to experience the world rather than whizzing through it. You see the right amount of stuff that you're supposed to see as a human, I think. and you're working hard, and it's actually something I've thought about quite a bit, is like this idea of wheels and whales. You could hop on a plane and the car and take a boat to go see some whales. There's a good chance you won't see them even if you do that, because they're unpredictable. They're a wild animal. If you take a bike there, I found, even if you don't see it, you're kind of knackered enough to the point where that dissatisfaction or kind of disappointment of not seeing something doesn't feel quite the same, because you've already had a good day on the bike. It's already there's a level of endorphins that are released just from doing a sport.
Especially up there where the weather's so wild.
Yeah. There's some stuff in life that are out of your control. So doing something like riding a bike and having a multi-day adventure on a bike is something you can control and have a good time.
There is just that satisfaction, and there was also a hint in there, what we've spoken about a bit already, which is that idea of that nature immersion, feeling the rhythm and the flow of nature, understanding the sequences, understanding the local wildlife. You know, you might not have seen a whale when you were there every day in the Shetlands, but you were really aware of the wildlife that was present there. You were aware of the weather system that was wild and moving through, and also felt the rhythms of that probably too. There's something else also when you're wild camping, not necessarily, but you can be up and down with the sun. There is this natural rhythm of being awake when the sun's up or when the bird call starts to going to sleep and the moon's down and stuff like that. And there is just that feel to it. But no, I absolutely love it. Ben Boxer, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been so awesome to connect and to hear a different type of adventure as well. One that's not necessarily needed to be point to point, but one that was really grounding for you. And everyone who takes an adventure comes back changed. And I can totally see it with you. But I also get energized knowing you're, making different iterations of this adventure now. You're stoking your own wanderlust fire. You're making a tangible impact on your environment and hopefully rubbing that feeling off on those around you as well. Thanks so much for being an awesome legend, caring for our environment, spreading the stoke, and also sharing your story and experiences here on the podcast on Seek Travel Ride.
Oh, thanks so much. That's very kind of you to say. No, it's been good fun talking about this stuff. I could talk about it all day, so thank you.
There we go, listeners. I hope that you are as energized as I am after chatting with Ben, and also just getting an insight into that very real cliched idea of thinking global, acting local, and the differences that we can make even when we're taking these awesome adventures. I loved so many elements of Ben's story. The first idea of, just wanting to explore the Shetlands on a bike at that slower pace and mix it and combine it with his love for marine biology there, spotting the killer whales. Could you imagine what that would have been like? Very similar to just that amazing serendipitous moment of seeing that small family of puffins, all the northern lights as well, and all while out on a super adventure. But I also loved that he knew himself enough to know that in that time leading up to a trip to Vancouver, he'd need something to sort of motivate him and inspire him more locally. And just the knock-on effect that has had, to think that now this year he's out there physically collecting rubbish off his local beaches, collecting the rubbish and making a tangible, real difference and finding community in those things as well. I think there's so much power to be taken from that, and I think the more Ben Boxers we have in this world doing these type of things, linking it into adventure as well, the better. Thanks so much, Ben. Listeners, if you have been enjoying the podcast and you would like to support me out here on the show, you can buy me a coffee. I run this podcast independently. I do all of the editing, all the research, the interviews, and the marketing, and it does take a fair amount of work. I do love the stoke that the community gives me, and if you're enjoying what I put out each and every week and you want to show your appreciation, a virtual coffee goes a long, long way to keeping this show running. You can find my link to buy me a coffee in the show notes, or simply head to buymeacoffee.com/Seek Travel Ride. And if you do, make sure to leave me a message and let me know what is it that you love about the podcast and where is your next bike adventure taking you. And until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening. A big thanks to Red White Apparel for supporting this episode of the podcast. Their bib shorts have made a real difference to how I feel on the bike hour after hour after hour. They're comfy, smartly designed, and I no longer spend hours shifting around on the saddle trying to find a position that will work for me. You can find a link to Red White Apparel in the show notes. Click on the link and support the brands that support the podcast.